A little girl meets a monstrous voice on an empty prairie. Ellie and Eddie crawl out of hell, one layer at a time. A lie is spun to protect the unknown. Welcome to Hidden Oaks. Alice didn't have to be old or wise to be worried about stalling out in the open prairie. They were out past the wilds of Minnesota, in the Dakotas, when the axle and wheel decided to partially separate from the back end of their wagon. Something cracked and sent them nearly off the narrow trail, which wormed drunkenly through the land. Her father, wasting no time, quickly unhitched one of the horses and tore apart the axle until he found the brake. In just a few hours, he mounted the animal and was racing ahead to the nearest town to get it fixed. This was the third time he dealt with this issue. He was all out of replacement parts. He could waste no time with his family abandoned in the plains. He left them the rifle, which his oldest son Frank would handle. He whispered to its nickel frame before leaving his family so it could understand the severity of the situation. He had to let it know how dangerous it was to be on the plains at nightfall. They could not be too far from Deadwood, which was their final destination after leaving St. Louis. Alice's father was named Charles, and he was a carpenter. There was plenty of work in Deadwood with the blossoming gold rush. He'd be busy with work all the time, and his children would have a school to learn at for the first time in their life. They just had to make it there. For Alice on the frontier, it was hard not to feel small below the never-ending sky and its vast blue dome. Sometimes, she felt trapped from all the open space that was around her, an invisible cage of long yellow grasses, bits of flower, and empty hillsides. Besides her mom, dad, two brothers, and the horses, there were no sounds but the wailing, vacuous din of the wind rolling across the plains in turbulent waves. At night, it was like trying to sleep against a perpetual tempest. After her father left, Alice tried to distract herself by picking wildflowers and twisting them into wreaths, bracelets, and other bits of floral ornamentation. Alice had just turned 8 years old. She was wearing a long gray dress with a white-collared shirt, which was stained by mud and sweat. She had red hair, green eyes, and freckles across her round face. She was the only redhead in her family, which made her the target of multiple insults from her brothers. "Hey, Alice, you pontificating because your head's ablaze? Hey, Alice, give us some of that hair so we can get this fire properly started. Hey, Alice, better hide your head when we go through town, lest we have a pail of water thrown across the wagon." Alice didn't like being different than the rest of her family, but there was nothing she could do about it. There was no way to change who she was, much less the color of her hair. Alice's mom noticed a river downhill from the trail where their wagon had been crippled. It was a long, meandering tail of clear water, rushing over round rocks and sandy streaks. On the edges were a variety of reeds and grasses, spiking the jade banks like bad haircuts. The thinner strands of greenery billowed gently against the omnipresent wind. It was almost hypnotic if stared at for too long, which was easy, since they were surrounded by a gusty void that was without any other points of interest. "Alice Rose, get your hide down there to the river with your brother to help him catch some fish. You're just walking around playing with flowers. There's work to be done," her mother chided from behind the off-white canvas top of the covered wagon, which trembled above the stalled wooden cart like a bubble. "Mom, I don't want to take her. She'll scare all the fish away," Sam said in his nasally voice. He was a few years older than Alice, but not much taller. His hair was brown, and his nose round and constantly congested. "Take her along. Fetch some water as well. Just find something to do while we wait. And listen for us to yell if someone appears on the hills," her mother said again. Because she was hidden behind the white slip, her words seemed to get lost on the wind as Alice listened. The river was farther away from the trail than the children initially thought. There was no real path to walk, and Alice had to stay on Sam's heels or risk losing him in the long grass. The sun was hot. It was early summer. Each day felt longer and warmer than the rest. Multiple times Alice had to blink away sweat in her eyes. Sam was wearing a white shirt with brown slacks. She memorized the worn patterns of dust and damage on his back. Focusing on them kept her walking. They broke through the river brush after a small eternity. The closer they had gotten to it, the more she could hear the water bubbling. The bank was relatively high up from the current. It wasn't a very wide stream, but it flowed steadily. There were inky, dark spots at various locations, marking depth. Sam angled his body toward those areas and dug his feet into the weeds. He had a wooden rod with a brass reel. It was their only one for the trip. Sam nodded at the tendrils of grass along the streak of reflecting fluid sky. "Make yourself useful, Alice. Go hunt for some frogs. I need bait," Sam said, pushing her slightly away from him. "What if I get lost?" "Just yell if you get lost. I can hear you. The frogs won't be far," Sam said, pushing her again. Alice sighed and started to amble along carefully. She barely knew how to swim. This fear made her distracted, and she started humming to herself to stay calm. That's when she noticed it. Drifting on the always present breeze, bobbing up and down like a dance without a beat, a single butterfly glided by just ahead of Alice. She'd noticed hundreds of butterflies as she'd traveled through the plains. This one was different. It was larger, and didn't look furry, soft, and delicate like the ones Alice was used to. This one was glittering, tremulous, as if a piece of the sun had been tied down with bits of effervescent lace. Its wings were blue and its body yellow. Despite the sunlight, it held its own center of illumination, holding its details steady in the glare. "It's beautiful," a hollow voice said. The words shook her and made the world bounce for a second behind her eyes. The sounds of the wailing plains muted as if they were scared away. Alice's eyes followed the river ahead and found a large cobblestone bridge curled over the water in a rocky arc. Along its round and bulbous lines were patches of moss, which blushed velvety green in the sunlight. Sneaked between weathered cracks and jutting edges were small letters carved into the stones themselves. Alice could barely read, but this language was nothing she'd seen before. Alice internally condemned herself with this mistake. She knew better than to wander close to anyone in this territory. She was only a stone's throw away from the structure. How could she not have noticed this bridge, she thought. Below the eyelash of architecture was a dark opening, which looked so sullen and abysmal, it was like staring into a world where light did not exist. "Don't be afraid, child," the voice rattled from the deep. The girl started to walk backwards. She almost tripped, but used the tall grass to balance. They cut and scratched her hands, but the pain didn't reach her. The depth beneath the bridge was making her body forget what it was doing. She glanced behind her, and the lonely river looked back. Her brother was far away. She couldn't even see the bend of his fishing pole craned over the current. "Am I speaking the right dialect? I thought I heard you correctly on the hill," the voice said. Alice continued to retreat. Her eyes couldn't sense the natural echoes of the Dakotas. All she could hear was a strange melody growing louder from beneath the bridge. "Enough! Stop!" the voice said. The earth rumbled and the stalks of greenery behind her back and sides sprouted upwards like hungry flames. They hemmed her in, forcing her to stare at the bridge. "What? Who are you?" Alice said. There was another rattle in the earth as something large shifted in the dark, staring at her. "You do speak. I was worried you were a mute," the voice said. More quakes without answers shook the earth. "Still, you're awfully quiet. Come closer to the bridge." Alice eyed the water on her right. She didn't know how to swim. One slip would send her into the current where she would surely drown. "Oh, you fear the water. Let me help you," the voice said. There was a gurgle, then a snap of thunder just behind Alice. Fluid churned over itself and thrashed. The river stopped flowing where she was standing. When Alice tried to focus on what was causing this obstruction, she couldn't see anything. Nothingness was plugging every drop from traveling toward the bridge. The stream reversed course, flowing the other direction in laborious churns, as though it was afraid to. "Better?" the voice said. Alice took a few steps forward. Her legs were not quite listening to her the way she wanted. She could feel the structure towering over her, like she was a mere trembling dot against its rocky edges. The void that had opened where the water had been cut off revealed a muddy bottom, with patches of bright green plants growing with a sense of surprise, having no river permanently covering them. A few brook trout flopped up and down. Their marbled and spotted bodies caught the sun as they floundered. Alice couldn't help but stare at their shocked eyes, staring at her on shore. "Don't worry. They will not die. I don't let anything die if I can help it," the voice echoed. The breeze settled even further. This was as quiet as Alice could remember the plains being. "What's your name, little girl?" it said.
Alice. Alice is my name."
"Alice. That's lovely. It is nice to speak with you, Alice."
What's your name?"
Alice asked. It was hard to have a conversation with the darkness beneath the bridge. There was a breathing sound echoing at her from inside of it. They reminded her of an animal, but she couldn't remember what. "I have many names," the voice echoed. Alice found herself walking into the riverbed. Her feet seemed attached to strings that she couldn't see. The air smelled filthy and dank. Her shoes sunk into the sediment a few inches as she moved. "What do you desire, Alice?" the voice said.
"Desire?"
Alice said. There was a sigh of sorts. It was deep and sharp. "What do you want, Alice?" the voice said, only louder.
I'm out here catching frogs with my brother, or for my brother, for bait. He's fishing,"
she said, trying to find her voice. The bridge seemed to be playing on every strand of nervousness inside her soul. "Bait? How perfect," it said.
"What?"
"Nothing, Alice. Tell me, where did your voyage begin?"
"We're from St. Louis. We're heading to Deadwood. We were going to settle in Yankton, but Pa wanted Deadwood."
"Such funny names for places, Alice. Only humans would bother with such titles," the voice said, sucking in air between words, like it was laughing, or at least trying to. The sound made Alice uncomfortable.
I should return. The plains aren't safe, even if you can see in every direction," Alice said.
"Not every direction. Only the ones you're used to. I could show you more. There are many ways to see things," the voice said. Alice didn't know how to respond. Her shoulders were curling into themselves. Her body was feeling smaller and smaller below the darkness. "You're safe out here, Alice. Safer than you understand," the voice said again. There was a yell behind her. It was her brother's, breaking through the silence of their conversation. The girl felt her body being tugged up the bank and out of the mud. Something unseen was pulling on her. She just didn't know what. The river collapsed into itself silently, washing over the muck exposed earlier. Alice looked up after regaining her footing and gasped to herself. The bridge was gone. Just a long and wide bend of pulsing water mimicking the clear sky and clouds looked back at her. She turned to see her brother weaving his way through the brush.
"Lord, the river went wild there for a while. I was worried it swept you away."
"Didn't want Ma to be upset," Sam said. He stopped and pointed at Alice's hands. She looked dumbfounded, as though there was a disconnect between her brain and throat. You finally did something right, Alice. Look at all those frogs. It was hard to believe everything that had happened. It seemed like only moments ago that they were at home with their father. Just a matter of minutes since he was waking them up, getting them in the car and driving here, and then opening up the ground and controlling earth and water in a way that changed their entire understanding of reality. Now Eddie and Ellie found themselves in total darkness. After their father had burst into flames, fallen into the pit, and what was left of the fire had rushed up through the ceiling of the cavern. All light had completely extinguished along with it. Even their flashlights had failed. As they blinked in the darkness, they could still see the red-orange streaks of the flames that had flashed before their eyes. If they could have seen each other at that moment, they would have seen their shocked faces and clothing covered in soot that was only broken by clean little lines where sweat streaked their foreheads and cheeks. Eddie began fumbling around in the darkness.
Oh my god. What the hell? What the fuck? Is he dead?
He just started on fire and fell off a cliff. What do you think? Of course he's dead. Damn it, Dad. You were still recovering. You weren't ready for this. We weren't ready for this.
They stood in silence in the dark, neither one knowing exactly what to do. They knew that somewhere off to their left was a cliff that plummeted down into the abyss. They also knew there were deadly traps, or whatever they might call the fire that had taken their father, and they knew they couldn't move too far forward either. Ellie slid her feet toward where she knew there was a rock wall to her right. She felt open and exposed in the middle of the path. She wanted something to help her feel grounded and safe. Her foot struck the wall, and at the same time she reached out her hand and felt along it. She turned and put her back up against it, and while she did, she could hear Eddie loudly tapping something and breathing hard.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to get this damn flashlight to work. We can't see. We're gonna fucking die here.
Ed, come on. Stop with that. I need you to help me think.
Can't get this damn light. We can't see anything.
Eddie, stop it. Listen to me. Come over to the wall, slowly.
The tapping stopped and everything went silent again except a slight breeze echoing through the cave. Then the sound of Eddie's slowly shuffling feet on the grit of the cave floor began to echo through the great chasm. A hand groped against Ellie's face as her brother felt his way through the darkness to the rock wall. He apologized to her and then slid himself next to her, resting his back against the stone. They sat in silence, their backs against the wall. Eddie doing everything he could not to lose his mind. Ellie thinking about what they needed to do next. As they leaned there, a sound from somewhere ahead of and above them came to their ears. It was a gentle, soft sound that had a somewhat monotonous hum or almost whistle to it. Then they felt a cool breeze rustle their hair and caress their faces. It was the breeze their father mentioned to them. He had said it was cool, and usually came from above.
Oh, fuck, it's another one of those things. This time it's gonna push us off the cliff. It's gonna grab us and fucking...
Ellie groped out beside her and grabbed onto her brother's shoulder, squeezing tightly.
Edward, stop and breathe. Listen, we can't freak out right now. We'd end up just like Dad, walking into one of those things or running off the cliff.
Okay, breathe. Don't panic.
We have to be a team here. We have to think. We're gonna have to try and find a way to see, or maybe we can slowly feel our way back the way we came. We've been there. We know the way. We can do this, Ed.
Yeah, okay.
As they calmed, they started to notice more of the physical sensations they were experiencing. The chilled breath of the wind continued to lick across them as they sat there. It wasn't strong, but it came steadily. They had both broken out in a sweat after the heat from the blaze, and their panicked bodies had gone into fight or flight mode. Now, with the heat gone and the wind playing over them, they began to shiver from the cold. They also started to notice smells they hadn't noticed before. There was still the damp, fetid odor of the cavern, but now it was accompanied by a smoky scent that had the hint of cooked meat on it as well. They both put the thought out of their minds as it came to them, and tried to breathe through their mouths as much as they could.
I have Dad's bag. I'm gonna feel around in there and see if there's not another flashlight or lighter, or something we can see by.
She followed the strap with her hand down to the body of the satchel, found the flap, and fumbled it open. As she looked down, she noticed a glint of light deep inside the bag. She pulled the bag across her body and held it in front of her stomach, but when she did, the light disappeared. She reached her hand into the bag and slowly shuffled the items around inside. If there had been light to see by, Eddie could have seen the look of deep focus on her face. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her gaze speared down into the satchel that she could not see. There were many different items inside the sack. She couldn't tell what any of them were as she groped for something, anything familiar. Mainly, she was hoping to see the glint of light appear again. Then, just as she was about to stoop down and dump the contents out, she saw it. Down at the bottom of the bag, creating slight silhouettes of other items in its way, was a dull, whitish-gray light. Slowly, carefully, she pushed her hand into view of the light. She could see her fingers in front of it. The first thing she had seen since watching her father fall in a ball of fire to his death. She cautiously moved her hand so she wouldn't push another object in the way of the light, losing it again. As she got closer to it, she felt a very faint, cool sensation, and what she thought might have even been a little breath of air that seemed to be coming from the same source. Then, finally, she felt her hand touch something soft like cloth. She saw her fingers more defined and could actually see the color of her flesh and fingernails in the soft white light. She gently began to pull the cloth, and the light came with it. She put her other hand in the bag as well and wrapped it around the object. It felt like a small pouch made out of velvet, and it seemed to be filled with heavy oblong things. When she got it free of the satchel, she hunkered down. She didn't want to drop anything and have it roll away from her. She was holding a softball-sized velvet bag that was mostly closed with a little drawstring. From the mouth of the bag came the light. "What the hell is that?" She didn't answer her brother. She used her hands to open the mouth of the bag all the way, and they gazed inside. A white-gray stone entirely covered in strange symbols was glowing gently. It seemed to pulse in intensity as it sat there. Ellie pulled it out and held it in her hand. It was about the size of a golf ball, though not perfectly round. It was cool, and as before, it seemed that a second coolness emanated from it as it glowed.
Here's our light. Step 1.
"You expect us to see our way back with that?"
Oh yeah, you're right. Here, let me use the flashlight in my back pocket. What the fuck else do you want us to use? It's all we've got, Ed. Come on.
"It's just not much light is all."
It's something. It's a step forward. And... Eddie, the glow is the same as the breeze.
"What?"
Look, when the breeze blows, it glows brighter. And it feels cold, just like the wind.
He said something about a cool breeze. That's what he was expecting to find before the fire got him. "Ellie, we need to be careful." Ellie gripped the stone between her index finger and thumb and held her arm out in front of her. She saw the shine of a reflection that she was expecting a few feet down the path in front of them.
There! See that?
"What?"
The reflection. That's the lantern. I saw Dad drop it before he fell. Do you think you can go out there and get it? Go slow. Don't go any farther down the path than you need to.
"The fucking thing is dead. We used it up, remember? What the fuck do we even need that piece of junk for anymore anyway? We're never using this shit again. I am not coming back in here."
Damn it, Eddie. Then here, you hold this.
She thrust the stone at her brother's face, and he took it from her, holding it out in his shaking hand. She was getting fed up with his selfishness, his panic, and his fear. She had come to hate how, when things got difficult over the years, all he did was run away. Today, she was going to do what needed to be done. She felt that she was the only one who could, so she relied on her own inner strength. Crouching low, she slowly crawled out to the lantern, grabbed it, and came back to the wall, all the while maintaining at least 3 points of contact to the ground. When she neared it, the cool breeze blew at her harder than before. It seemed to sense her moving near it, and it didn't appear to want her there. When she got back to the wall, she replaced the lantern in the large open mouth of the satchel. Then she stood up, leaned against the wall, and put her hand out for the glowing rock.
Here, give me the rock. We'll use the light to go back up the cave. You take the pouch with the other ones.
But what's the point of even keeping these out?
Just take it. I have a hunch.
Eddie dropped the stone into the palm of her hand, and she handed him the small velvet bag. He was frustrated with so many aspects of this situation. He felt ashamed of himself for not being able to keep it together better, but he was embarrassed and irritated with how Ellie was handling him, telling him what to do over and over again. He felt a burning resentment of her ability to remain calm and in control in such a tense and new situation, while he struggled not to panic. She had been the one who didn't have her life figured out. His own life in LA was so full of order, control, and stability. How could it be that in this situation, their roles were turned so completely around? In front of him, Ellie held the stone out before her. The luminescence wasn't extremely bright, but it was enough to light up both of their upper bodies and a portion of the wall ahead of them. They could just barely make out the ground at their feet, and all around them it was still very dark. Slowly, they shuffled their way along the wall, back toward the opening that their father had carved with his magic water jar. Every shambling step up the path seemed to take an eternity. They had no idea how much time had passed since the fire, or even since they had started walking back the way they had come. Everything dragged out, and time seemed to be moving forward in slow motion. The breeze at their backs lessened as they continued up the path, and the light from the stone began to dim the further they progressed. Ellie didn't say anything about it, not wanting her brother to worry any more than he already was. She didn't want him to start panicking again, because right now that would just get them into more trouble, and she knew it. But she couldn't hide it from him any longer. Just as the stone wall at the end of the path came into sight, the white glowing stone flickered twice and then blinked out. Eddie gasped. Ellie quickly worked to calm him before he even escalated.
Ed, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. Just stop and think.
As she turned to face him, ready to say more, she noticed his hand by his side, the one holding the small bag. A flickering blue luminescence dimly poured out of its mouth.
See? Look at the bag.
Eddie raised the bag between them and opened the drawstring mouth. Very dimly, another stone was glowing. Blue. He pulled it out, and she held her now inert stone back toward him. They traded. As he took the white stone, it flickered once. He let out a short yelp and dropped it, but luckily it fell into the bag. It was cold.
Yeah, it was like that the whole time. It matched the breeze exactly. Now the breeze is gone, and so is the light. I'm guessing they're connected somehow. See this one? It has different symbols all over it, too. Maybe we'll be able to see it when it's brighter, or later on. But I have an idea about what these things are. Watch.
She turned around and held the rock out in front of her. Very slightly, the luminosity of the rock grew as it moved forward. She shuffled ahead with more confidence this time, still only creeping, but not as slowly as before. The wall ahead came into view, and now they could see the opening through which they had followed their father when they'd entered this chamber. When they reached that point, the rock was glowing brightly. They could see each other entirely, the ground of the path around them, and into the narrow passageway. She motioned for her brother to get closer to her. Together they entered the rough, narrow corridor and wove their way through quickly. Their speed continued to pick up as they moved on. There was no deep abyss to fall into now, nor any traps that weren't sprung. At least they didn't think there were. They had come this way already, and so they felt more secure, more sure of their direction. Eddie placed his hand loosely on his sister's upper back and didn't allow himself to get further behind her than he could reach. After a short time, they stepped out into the first chamber they had entered after coming underground. The blue light from the rock was almost blinding at this point. It nearly lit the entire chamber. Ellie turned around and held the rock down between the two of them.
Look at it. All the writing? But then this one's different.
Oh yeah. All these other symbols are old and well carved, but this one, I mean, it's obviously a water drop, but like someone scratched it there more recently.
We'll have to look at all the other rocks when we're back out. But I think they have something to do with the different traps, or layers, or secrets of this place, or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. Then the white one was the wind or whatever comes next. Huh. This stuff is also fucking weird.
Come on. We can look at it when we get out. We're almost there now.
Ellie turned around and began to move toward the entrance to the chamber where the ground had opened for them. She had reached the stairs and was standing at their base. He jogged over to her. They stood side by side looking up the stairs. They ascended, right into the ceiling of the cave, but now with no opening to the outer world. Just the curved branches that their father had spoken to on the other side, sticking down into the dirt above them. Eddie's heart began to pound, his vision narrowed, his breathing increased. He felt the walls of the room around him close in on him in his mind. His eardrums felt muffled. All he could hear was his blood pumping and the sound of his sister's voice arriving dully to his ears, but he didn't listen to it. He couldn't through his panic. He dashed up the steps and began to push on the dirt and the branches that looked like a rib cage. It didn't budge. He pounded on the ground above, yelling nonsense as he did so. Then he knelt down on the top step and began clawing at the dirt. His berserk tearing was getting out of control. He continued to shout. He was like a dog searching for his favorite bone in the yard, only he was digging up and doing so with a terrifying insanity. 2 of his fingernails snapped back and fell off. In his fury, he didn't notice. And then something grabbed the collar of his shirt and he was flung down the stairs on his side. It was Ellie. She had ascended and pulled him away from his insane task. This is a nightmare. Why can't I just wake up?
It's not a dream this time, Eddie. We're here. This is happening. You have to see that. It's not just a vision this time.
Well, I wish it was. I wish I had never fucking come into any of this. I should have known anything with the old man was just going to be the same bullshit it always is. I never should have stayed. I should have just fucking turned around and head back to LA. God damn this bullshit. I don't want this life. It's not fucking fair.
Do you know how fucking selfish you are? Everything is always about you. Seriously, you think you've helped out because you send money sometimes? Jesus. Anytime anything gets hard, you run away. You literally can't be bothered to stay and try to do anything to actually help. Anything that actually needs doing. God forbid emotionally support the people that care about you.
Gabriella, I was there for Mom when...
You shut the fuck up and listen to me for once. And don't you Gabriella me. I'm done with this. The only bullshit around here is yours. I'm not just going to be nice anymore. And enough about Mom already. You weren't really there for her yourself. Yeah, sure, you were with her for a bit at the end, and that's great. But when they split up, and you didn't do anything to help her, or me, or Dad, you did everything you could to set your life up so you could run away. You know what? You're a fucking coward. You know that? A fucking coward. All you do is run and hide. On top of that, when anyone tries to reach out, or talk to you, or be there for you when you're having a hard time, you're a fucking asshole too. Why don't you just shut the fuck up and stop whining about how terrible life is for you and how you wish you stayed and where it was more comfortable for you? God damn, you're a prick sometimes.
Wow.
Save it. I don't want to hear it right now. We need to get out of here and we need to get back to the house and figure out whatever we can about this place, about what Dad needed to do down here.
Eddie cast his eyes down at the floor. He looked embarrassed. He was ashamed of himself. Everything she had said was right, and he knew it. His sister had never once spoken to him like this. He also knew he needed to hear it just now. He couldn't admit all of it. Parts of him still wanted to defend himself. Another small part of him was proud of her. Underneath all of the shame and self-doubt, he was happy to see his little sister coming out of something so terrifying with such strength, such determination. He knew right now, in this moment, she was the only reason he wasn't losing his mind and dying down here with his father. All right, Ellie. So how the fuck do we get out?
Well, not like that. Not by freaking the fuck out like a goddamn lunatic. I knew you panicked, but holy shit, Eddie. Do you remember that movie, The Edge? The one with Anthony Hopkins and the bear?
Vaguely. What about it?
Well, Charles, the Anthony Hopkins guy who saves everyone, says something about, do you know why people die in the woods? They die of fear, or shame, or something like that. Well, it's true. You keep panicking or going back to, I wish I had never come here, or I should have just run away. That doesn't get you anywhere but trapped. Or dead. In that movie, he says one thing that can save you, and it's to think. We've got to use our heads here. Dad's been doing this a long time. Calm down. There's a way out, and we just have to think.
Okay, I'm calm. I'm here, Ellie. I'm calm. With that, Ellie handed the glowing stone to her brother. She turned from him and walked confidently back up the steps, slowing near the top. She walked until her head was just below the dirt ceiling, and she reached her hands up and began to caress the dirt and branches. She turned her face up to them as she did so and whispered something. Just as she did, the ground began to open just as it had before. She looked down at her brother who sat on the ground with his mouth agape.
Come on.
Eddie rose to his feet and started slowly up the steps, still looking up at her and the opening roof of the cave in awe. How did you do that? What did you say? They stepped out onto the island in Hidden Oaks Park. It was completely dark out, the sky above filled with stars. They had no idea how many hours, maybe days, had passed while they were down in the cave, but it didn't seem like it could have been an entire day.
It's not important. Come on. Let's figure out what the hell is happening. Agent Friedman, come in. Close the door, please, and have a seat.
Why do you have the news on?
Thank you,
What?
There.
Angela.
This should be it.
Behind me, you can see the edge of Hidden Oaks Park, which has just been designated as an environmental protection site and put under temporary quarantine. As of this morning, the walking and biking trails are closed. I'm here with Mr. Linson from the Department of... I'm sorry, what is your department's name again?
We're actually a cross-departmental task force assembled specifically to contain and study this unique organism, a species of moss never before seen, at least in this region.
What is the name of this moss? And what is the reason for closing this section of the park?
I'm going to answer your second question first and state that while long-term effects of exposure are as yet unknown, we do consider this moss and especially its spores to be a possible health risk. We have had reports of effects such as nausea, disorientation, and even hallucinations.
I see you've got a sample there. Is that the...
Yes, I don't know if you can see. I know these containers are magnets for fingerprints and glare, but I can tell you that it looks very ordinary. It's difficult to tell apart from other varieties, even by our own experts.
Where did this variety come from, originally?
We have been working with biologists from around the world, but have not yet determined whether this is a newly discovered species, a transplant from a very different ecosystem, or even a mutation of another local moss. We're also looking into the possibility that there is more than one type of spore involved, and that they might only pose these risks when combined. We have a great deal left to learn, so we ask that residents bear with us while we determine what's best for everyone's safety.
So what are your current guidelines, and how will they be enforced?
At this time, we are asking residents to stay out of the section of the park between 28th and 29th Street in order to avoid contamination. We realize that this is an inconvenience, but it is important to keep this organism under quarantine until we know more. As for enforcement, we are working with local police who have been very understanding, but in the end, this is a great community. Several of our team live right around here, and I think we can safely say that we all want what's best for the park and for each other.
How long do you expect this quarantine to last?
Well, that's difficult to say. We're currently working with a scope of 90 days, but there's so much we don't know that we aren't about to set anything in stone just yet. For all we know, this moss could shrivel up and go away on its own next week.
If someone thinks they may have come in contact with these spores, what should they do?
We have a telephone number, which I was told you could put up on the screen now, right? Yeah. And of course, if you feel ill or start to have any odd symptoms or hallucinations, you should seek medical attention as usual.
Always good advice. From Hidden Oaks Park, I'm Kate.
That's good. Gives us room to build if we need to expand the quarantine.
What it gives us is time. The cover is true in more ways than one. What's in there is dangerous, and there's too much we don't know. In particular, We need to assess the situation with the family, which I'll be seeing to personally.
Last I heard, Tupperware left the hospital early, but he's with his kids, so that's good, right?
Possibly. Oh, before we get started, I want you to know that we have a couple of leads on possible fast-track recruits. Dispatch is hurting, and of course...
The lab, yeah. We were already running pretty lean, and now with the loss of...
Agents Garnett and Jersey. Yes, I know. They've left a large void there. Matson and I didn't always see eye to eye, but he left quite a void in the field, too.
That's actually why I'm here. I quit.
Quit? No.
Commander Mira, I resign, and I request resettlement.
Denied. I do not accept your resignation.
Then fire me. I got 3 agents killed on what was supposed to be a milk run.
Agent, they were all under my orders.
Then fire me for disobeying chain of command and violating confidentiality contracts.
I personally gave you access to that material. We were researching sanctioned...
Not that. Comms to and from Alpha Division. I've decoded and read them all.
You've seen the messages between myself and Alpha?
And the one internal one that got relayed here during the network upgrades.
Your situation, our situation, is unique. I can't say I approve of this, but I can't say I'm entirely surprised either. Nor will I fire you over it.
Want to know what that internal message said?
No. Now listen, you should...
There's a rumor that Crispin is back.
Agent Crispin was... I won't insult you with the official story. He was your right-hand man. You deserve to know. He died in 88. I saw it happen myself.
What?
His throat was cut. By someone in Alpha Division, in fact.
Alpha? Why would...
But we're not discussing the late Agent Crispin. We're talking about you. You had...
No! Fire me! I can't be responsible for any more good people dying. I can't do this anymore. Fire me, goddammit!
We've been over that. My answer is still no. Now, you said you had 2 things you needed to talk to me about.
I did?
Yes. Your attempt to quit and or be fired came first. So I'm curious, what's the second?
I wanted to tell you this as a civilian under a resettlement protection. There are some agents who think we need to abandon this whole Order Zero thing. The body parts, the containment destabilizing, and now our own agents. I think...
Out with it.
I don't know when they're going to make their move, but I think it won't be long. You're looking at a mutiny.
Mutiny? How many? Who?
I don't know, on either count. I only have a fragment of a single message. It's on this backup tape. It was being erased when I found it. All the other data on here is unrecoverable. At least, I can't recover it. There. That's everything I had. And I've made it a point to be insubordinate this whole meeting, Commander. Can you please fire me now? I can't be a part of...
Here's how things are going to work, Agent Friedman. You're going to complete your prototype tech to reshape the illusions that 17 uses. You're going to finish and document the design, field test, and fix any quirks, and train multiple agents on its use.
But...
We'll find at least 1 new agent for your lab. I'll give that priority over dispatch. Meanwhile, you're going to use your pension for obtaining information you're not supposed to have and bring me everything you can about this uprising. Those are your final assignments, Agent Friedman. And when they are complete, I will accept your resignation and grant your request for resettlement. Understood?
Yes, Commander.
Good. Dismissed.
The Hidden Oaks podcast is a collaboration between Patrick W. Marsh, Robert Dawn, and Owen Swerkstrom. The story Alice, written by Patrick Marsh. The Way Out, written by Robert Dawn. Cover story by Owen Swerkstrom. The voice of Hidden Oaks, Eddie, and Agent Friedman, performed by Robert Dawn. The voice of Ellie and Mira, performed by Robin Sand. The voice of Reporter Casey, performed by Melanie Ditter. The voice of Agent Linson, and original music composed and performed by David Schwartz. Find more of his works at dtschwartz.com. Produced by Robert Dawn, Owen Swerkstrom, and Patrick W. Marsh. You can find out more online by visiting us at hiddenoakspodcast.com or by finding us on Twitter at Hidden Oaks Pod, as well as Facebook and Instagram at Hidden Oaks Podcast. Hidden Oaks is an Ironfield independent production. Thank you for listening, and until next time.